And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am your host, Hank Garner, and today I am so excited to welcome Liza Tully to the show. Liza has a brand new book out, and I don't know if you guys are seeing that backwards or if it's just me, but the new book is The World's Greatest Detective and Her Just Okay Assistant. What an amazing, fun read this is, Liza. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've been waiting anxiously to talk about this. So, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and thank you for the nice words about my book.
Oh, I only say what I mean, and I thoroughly love this book. It hit a sweet spot that I have where I'm kind of a fan of cozy-ish mystery, and uh, more kind of lighthearted mystery, but that kind of reaches back and hits some of that Agatha Christie vibe. Some of the early mysteries that I fell in love with as a teenager because I had an aunt who would pass down books to me, and anyway, this book hit some nostalgia for me, made me laugh, kept me on my toes. Such a fun experience. So, uh, before we really dig into it, what is it that got you interested in mystery?
Well, it may surprise you to learn that I did not read Agatha Christie until about maybe 5 years ago, and I think I may be the only writer who can say that. I just didn't have it wasn't on my radar, to do that, and I had written other books, before this one, and the last one I wrote before this was, published under a different name, uh, Elisabeth Elo, and I published it as It's Suspense, and it was very, very dark, and it was set in Russia, and it was all about the Gulag and radiation poisoning, and just
So
one.
light weekend reading.
Yeah, it was terrible, basically, and it took me a really long time to write, and when I was done with it, I thought, "Gosh, I just can't see myself doing another big project like that," and
Yeah.
20 years ago, my first published novel was a comedy, so I thought, "I really wanna go back and do that. I just need a little, sunshine in my life." So,
Understood.
and then I read Anthony Horowitz's The Word is Murder, which is the first book in his Hawthorne Horowitz series, and I
Yes.
thought, "This book has everything I love in it, all in one place." And I thought, "Wow," and then I went back and I said, "I really need to read Agatha Christie." And so I started reading Agatha Christie, and I thought, "This is beautiful. This is such good stuff." I loved every minute of it, and I thought, "Wow, if I could try and do something like that, I would just be in heaven." And so I then set about, to write, a traditional mystery with a detective and a body and clues and all that good stuff, and set in contemporary times, set in our time, and with a relationship in the center of it between an older detective and a young apprentice. And that's how it came to me, and I didn't really look back, and I just really enjoyed writing this book. It was exactly what I wanted. It just made me happy, and it made me fall in love with writing all over again.
I love that. I just noticed someone in the chat was asking for the title of the book. They came in a little late, so I was just going to pop it up on screen here. Just whoever was asking about that was it Jane? Anyway, the world's greatest detective and her just okay assistant is the book, and we'll pop that back up a little while, and we'll put a link to it in the show notes to make it easy for folks to find. Um, so I I really find it interesting that the intersection of mystery and I don't know if comedy is the right word, but there's a lighthearted tone to a lot of this book and a lot of similar books. And you mentioned Anthony Horowitz; he was a guest on the show just a few weeks ago,
Wow.
and such an amazing guy. What a pleasure it was to pick his brain. But there's something interesting about the way those genres and on the surface, it feels like that they would not work together, but they absolutely work together. Why do you think it is that mystery and um, I don't want to say comedy. That's really not the right term, but a more lighthearted, grounded in reality, um, wry sense of humor. Why those things really seem to work together. Do you have any insight into that?
Well, I've thought about this, and I think if you go back and look at starting say Agatha Christie,
Yeah.
I'm not sure that she would have been able to write a sort of lighthearted murder mystery
Right.
because she was establishing the genre. And it's only because the genre has become so wildly popular that readers are very sophisticated about it and they know all the tropes and they know all the conventions and all the games and they know that there's a clue that's going to be coming and they kind of have the whole thing psyched out and they're ready to take the ride with you. And because everybody knows all of it, you can poke fun at the genre as you're writing it. So
Right.
we have the young detective who says, "I want to be a great detective someday," and of course that's just funny in itself because the great detectives, Sherlock Holmes and Poirot, they're fictional creations, and we buy into how wildly superior they are in their observational skills. But, I don't know if anybody actually knows any one person who is that. So
Right.
we we just buy into the game of it, and then that gives you all kinds of room to enjoy it and practice it and try and make it real with real people, but at the same time be conscious of the fact that you are writing in a very traditional genre in which you and the reader are always sharing a little joke about what's
Right.
going on. And but that doesn't mean that it can all be lighthearted because it is about murder,
Right.
and
Yeah.
you know,
Like some serious stuff happens. Yeah.
and it's about people and the extremes of emotion that people are feeling in this plot that in at some for some reason has driven an otherwise ordinary looking person to this extreme act of murder. So
Right.
we're talking about human nature and what is it that makes us go so wrong that we can look fine on the outside but have done something terrible. And I think it has to be kind of the way I see it anyway, it has to be kind of an ordinary person who is just one of many suspects, so you have
Right.
8, 9 suspects, any one of them could have done it. Well, if you think about, do you know 8 or think of all the people you know, how many of them are gonna be capable of murder? I hope I'm gonna say 0 of my friends would do that. So again, we're not really talking about murder per se, but we're talking about, um, an emotional state that has just gone too far, where someone has been pressed so far, and then the murder is kind of the example or the sign of somebody under a great deal of stress who's done this thing. So, the genre is false on many, many levels,
Yeah.
but it's also about something that I think is really important to all of us, and that is, when does human nature go wrong, um,
Right.
and what made it go wrong?
You mentioned tropes just a minute ago, and tropes are one of those things um, that that get maligned, especially by new writers. I feel like because we all want. I've never met a new writer or any writer that didn't begin because they felt like they had something to say. Like no one I've ever met gets into writing and publishing because they want to make a fortune. They all begin because they have something they want to express. And then when you start really studying craft and understanding that genres are made up of tropes, and these are the kind of the mechanics of what makes this genre work and what makes people love a particular genre, then you think, well, I want to tell a totally new story. And then you run the risk of alienating your readers and not connecting with them because they don't understand the story you're telling, and they get kind of preoccupied with trying to understand where you're coming from and what you're doing, and they kind of miss the story that you're trying to tell. And then as you become more successful and you publish more, you start understanding that uh, that barriers are a blessing. That the barriers of tropes actually give you a safe and secure place to tell your story. That the tropes are comforting, and just because they're tropes doesn't mean that they have to be trite and worn out, and all of that. That the thing that you fear so much when you first start learning about tropes is that you're just going to be another story in the vast sea of mystery stories going. So I said all that to ask, when you're thinking about a new story and you know that it's going to fit in this genre, therefore it needs to kind of be constructed of certain things. How do you think about those things while also keeping your story idea fresh, and telling things in a new way while also not alienating readers? And that was a convoluted question. I know. I apologize.
Well, that's a question I think that's I think writers struggle with it, and I know I have struggled with it, and it gets at the heart of what you're trying to do because you're taking something, the phrase is, "We want the same old thing, but we want it differently."
Right.
And the publishers are saying, "Readers like this, give us this, but do it differently." Um, and so when you're talking about this mystery genre, we know what the basics are. I mean, and I wanted to embrace the basics. You have the great detective, and I absolutely called her, "This is the great detective." Hello.
Yeah.
We're not that here she is. That's her. Just let's not argue about that. We've got her. And we have a body, and now we have an investigation, and here are the clues. And I really wanted to write to the final scene, the great reveal, which Agatha Christie made so famous for and was really such a popular um, part of this genre. So
Yeah.
those were the things I started with, and they're really very, very, very standard. And the book kind of chugs along, in behaving in all those correct ways that people expect. But then the question is, well, then how do you make it new? And then you come to the characters and the problems that they have. So the problems that are described in this book are going to be problems that people have in the year 2025, and maybe they're not completely new, um, but there should be recognizable characters that feel fresh to this book. At least I
Right.
hope that's what they do. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
Absolutely. Do you consider yourself more of a pantser or a plotter?
Oh, well, funny you should ask that question because I just wrote an essay, and it was and the title of it was "Not a Pantser or a Plotter. Maybe you're a notebooker." So I have this
Ooh.
whole
Where,
new.
where did you publish this essay?
I think it's going to come out either in maybe She Reads, one of
Okay.
those online magazines, but um, yeah. Anyway, but I actually grabbed my notebook here just
Okay.
so I could show you because people have asked me this question in the past, and they say, "Are you a
Yeah.
pantser or a plotter?" And I always say, "Well, I'm really neither, but I'm actually both." And then
Yeah.
what I end up saying is my process of creating anything is so chaotic that you just can't even try to put a name on it. And I always felt like I was doing it wrong, because I'm not this or that. And this time for this book, what I ended up doing is I just decided to go with the chaos of my brain. And I bought this very nice leather bound notebook. This is just one of them. I now have many of them. And I just went off by myself with my cup of coffee in the morning. And I parked at this very pretty spot near where I live. And I just daydreamed. And I just daydreamed for hours,
Yeah.
And I don't know if you can see this, but it just goes on and on and on and on and on. And you
I
can see
love
that
that.
I have and I have lists and I have questions and I have what happens now and I have what did this character say and I put the two characters in them. And what it does is it just lets me be as chaotic as I want to be.
Yeah.
But I feel like I have something, like I have ideas packed in here and not
Right.
sketchy ideas, but actual scenes, or I might write a whole chapter. So I might write a chapter from the middle of the book and thinking I probably will never use this, but here's a possibility. So then when I've done this, and I filled up a whole notebook before I ever started a draft. Um, and then when I started the draft, I felt like I didn't need an outline
Mhm. Because
because I
you understood the characters and
I knew the characters so
yeah.
well. Um, and but if I could just, I hope I'm not talking too much about
No,
this.
no, no, please.
Well, here's an example. So when I started this book, I said, okay, well, I want a great detective. So I created who I thought was going to be the great detective.
Yeah.
And I said, okay, she's great. I'm going to go with her. And I'm going to put her in conversation with this other person. And when I started writing the dialogue, it was very dry and dull and stiff. And I thought, oh, I had made her very taciturn and a little bit enigmatic. But you can't
Mm,
really write interesting prose from someone who's really taciturn and enigmatic because by definition, they're not giving you anything.
right.
So once I started writing it, I said, I can't really work with this. And then I ended up creating a character who was the exact opposite of the one that I had started. And all of a sudden, this woman she had a lot of opinions. She had a distinct character, distinct personality. She had a lot to say, and her voice just kind of was really clear to me. And once I created her, she didn't go away. She became the main detective. I wouldn't have got to her if I had gone with my first choice. And it wasn't until I really played around with that first choice and realized I wasn't feeling it that I then stretched myself a little bit to do something that I didn't think would work, but then it did. And so the whole thing is like that. It's just me trying to feel my way through what is making me happy, what feels good, and where is there a spark, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, so the notebook works really well for me, and that's why I ended up writing. I'm creating a third category here. So we have pantser, plotter, and notebooker.
I love it. I love it. I have a similar process to that. I can't read my own handwriting, so I'll have my in my Dabble project. I'll have in the story notes section. I'll kind of do what you do in the notebook, but just kind of random bits and pieces that might make sense one day, or just an idea for an interaction, that sort of thing. And a lot of my great ideas, or at least I feel like it in the moment, come when I'm walking my dog or something, and I'll pull my phone out and make notes there. So yeah, I love that idea, um, and rarely I think are people true pantsers or true plotters. I think the reality is somewhere in the middle. I don't like a strict outline, but I do kind of like a roadmap. I like to if I'm going from California to New York, there are 8 different ways you could go, and any number of circuitous places in between, but I ultimately know where I'm going. Do you know where your story? Do you know what your ending is when you begin writing?
Well, structurally, yes, because in this again in this traditional mystery set in contemporary times, the mystery begins with a body. It ends up. I knew
Right.
it would end up with a great reveal, and along
Yeah.
the way there would be suspects and conversations and clues. So that gives you a spine right there. Did I know the content? Did I know who the villain was going to be? No, yes and no. I put the people on the page thinking this might be the person because I want to feel like the detective, and the detective is thinking, "Is this the person?" So I'm
Right.
thinking, "Is this the person?" Maybe it could be, and I'm thinking of all the ways it could be, and putting that on the page as I'm writing. But the only thing that stuck in my mind about finding the character, the villain, was something that Agatha Christie said, and I don't know where I read this, but you have to introduce the villain fairly soon. You can't
Mhm.
just let them show up 3/4 of the way through the book, you know?
Right.
So the whole cast of character has to happen, within the first third of the book, maybe even the first 25% of the book, where, then you can now follow and it's not fair, I guess is what I'm saying, if they're not present, in the first third of the book.
Liza Tully is one of the names that you publish under. I think you have two other publishing names, pen names that you use. Um, what what other genres do you write in besides the lighthearted mystery? Or what first what would you call this genre that you're writing? The World's Greatest Detective and Her Just Okay Assistant. How do you classify what you're writing in?
I classify it as a traditional mystery,
Okay.
um, just because it has a golden age mystery set in
Yeah.
contemporary times.
Gotcha.
I'm
Okay.
not quite sure how that would be different from a cozy, other than the fact that it's, I'm not really sure. Maybe it's the
Yeah.
same thing. Maybe Agatha Christie would be classified as cozy,
Yeah.
just because there's no violence, there's no sex, there's no
Right.
swearing, and it's about ordinary people.
Yeah.
It's not about psychopaths or serial killers or
Right.
horrible, terrible people. It's supposed to be about the way that ordinary people live. So in that case, I guess if you want to qualify or classify Agatha Christie as a cozy, then I would say this book is a cozy too.
Yeah.
It but I would call it a traditional mystery.
Yeah. One thing that I love about traditional mystery or even cozy, if you want to look at it through that lens, is that most of the time we focus on the fact that the sleuth is a normal everyday person, but in a lot of ways, your villain is also. A lot of times, these stories are about people that do things uh, just because of a horrible day or a circumstance goes bad. They're not necessarily evil mustache twirling villains, but they're normal people that get shoved into extraordinary circumstances and they make the worst decision. And that's another thing that I think gets overlooked a lot of times. Yes, we have the everyday sleuth that solves crimes, but you don't normally have complete psychopaths, as the villains in a traditional mystery.
Right, right, and I think that, and that's kind of what I was getting at before, and that's why I think that one of the most important aspects of these types of books is the motivation of the killer,
Right.
because that's the real story that's going on
Hmm.
behind the scenes. It's like, why did so and so, who looks like all the other looks like the eight other suspects, who we
Hmm.
really can't identify as a psychopath or a murderer, why did that person why was that person the one to do this terrible thing? And then that becomes a story about motivation. Um,
Yeah.
and then that becomes a story about human nature and, um, what I think of sometimes, and I don't know if what I think sometimes of you remember the 7 deadly sins?
Yeah.
Did you learn that when you were a kid, and if you went
Yes.
to catechism school or something? And
Yeah.
because I was trying to think of, like, how do you find a motive that's new or different? I mean, we know that greed is a motive. The
Hmm.
trope, the classic way of thinking about it is the old guy has a big fortune, and if we kill him off, then we'll get the inheritance. And
Right.
so that's a typical story, and the motive is greed, which everyone can identify with. But if you wanted to do something different, how do you find different kinds of motives that would make somebody wanna kill somebody else? That's I find that really fascinating question.
Yeah. So um what other genres do you write in with your other pen names?
Well, I started writing, literary short stories, under my name, Elisabeth Panttaja, and that was, my original name was my father's name that I was growing up with, and then,
Yeah.
I wrote a comic novel, and my agent at the time said, "Would you consider changing your name?" Because my literary short stories were very, very different, um, and I don't and I was a newcomer, I didn't know what I was doing. I
Yeah.
thought, "Sure." By that time, I had been married for 17 years, and I had 2 kids, and their last name was Brink, so I said, "Yeah, I'll just go with Elizabeth Brink." And then I actually changed my name legally finally, after 17 years of marriage, I finally legally took my husband's name. He said, "You don't have to do that, my account." I was like, "Okay." But anyway, so that book was published under Brink, and then I turned around and I wrote this really dark suspense novel, and my agent at the time said, "Well, I didn't sign on for this. Sorry, you know, I thought you were gonna be a funny writer." So she and I parted ways, and then I found another agent, and he loved it, but then again, the publisher was like, "Well, we need you to change your name because you can see the problem here." So then I
Right.
chose Elisabeth Elo, and that is in honor of my father's ethnicity because he was Finnish, and Elo is a Finnish name and, should be pronounced Elo. Um, and then that worked for 2 books, and then all of a sudden I went back and I started writing, and now I have a traditional mystery. So again, I had the same problem, and, again, I changed my name. So that this is my third name, actually be my 4th. Um, but I chose the name Tully because that's an Irish name, and that's for my mother. So I'm
Wonderful.
running out of ethnicity, so I gotta stop here.
Um, I love that you are a fan of short stories. I'm a huge fan of short stories, and I love uh, Ray Bradbury's short story advice. Of he would tell people to write a different short story every week because at the end of the year, surely you couldn't have written 50 bad short stories. Kind of tongue in cheek, but I think there is a lot of wisdom there in the rote nature of just trying something and retrying until you succeed at it, and writing short stories does a lot for. We actually did a short story challenge a few months ago where we 60 days we went through writing a short story, and I told some of the folks that I was doing the challenge with that writing short stories will make you a better novelist. And even though they seem like completely different skill sets, what does short story writing do for you? Are there tools in your writer toolkit that you can point to that writing short stories has helped you, or does it just allow you to kind of stretch your your creative legs in a different way?
Well, when I started writing fiction, I had no idea that I didn't really even imagine that I would become a novelist or a published novelist. I started writing short stories because I needed to do something that felt, challenging and creative and interesting to me, and, you know, I just decided to write a short story, and, as the minute I started it, I couldn't really stop writing fiction because I feel like the problem of writing fiction had just got a hold of me, and I couldn't really it never has really let me go, and I'm probably gonna write fiction, for the rest of my life, whether I am published or not, because that's just what I for some reason, that's just what I need to do. But since I felt like I didn't know myself at all. I didn't even know what kind of short story should I write? So I just wrote, I tried this and I thought and then I tried something else and then I tried something else. And I was always asking myself, well, what will I write next? What will I try now? And how will I do it? And, what will so it was just exploration for me. And what I was writing was short enough so that I was a mom, I was teaching, I had a life. I didn't have the bandwidth to sit down and write a novel. I didn't believe in myself enough to sit down and even try to write a novel. So short stories was my way of developing myself as a writer, I think, through a lot of experimentation.
Yeah. When you're writing in a different genre, like your dark psychological thriller versus traditional mystery, are there things that you have to do to sort of get in the mindset to write that story? Is your pre-writing process different? Like how do you physically shift gears to write a completely different genre?
Well, so far, I have 4 published novels. each of them is written in the first person by
Okay.
with a woman's voice. And honestly, the reason why they're different is because they have different narrators, and the different narrators have different stories to tell. So when the narrator had a dark story, and that was the story I wrote. So I never really consciously switched genres. I switched narrators, and then the
Okay.
narrator told a different kind of story. So I guess I have a feeling that the voice dictates what kind of story will be told.
Gotcha. In your new book, The World's Greatest Detective and Her Just Okay Assistant, Olivia Blunt is hires on as a new assistant, and Aubrey Merritt is the investigator. Uh, how did you start thinking about this odd tension between these two characters? Because their dynamic together really is a breath of fresh air in this story, and is the cause of a lot of contention, but a lot of feel good vibes also. But it's like the it's such a it's such a roller coaster, the relationship between these two. How did you start thinking about them and start realizing that there was a story around these two disparate characters?
Well, I knew I wanted to write a detective duo, like Poirot and Hastings, or
Yeah.
um, Sherlock Holmes and Watson, for the simple reason that when you have two characters, they can talk to each other. And so it's, from a writer's point of view, it just gives you more material to work with to have the two characters. And so I was thinking about what their relationship should be. And I was thinking about, I think it's Eric Erickson's stages of human development. This shows you what a nerd I am. But the last stage, if I have this right, I probably don't, but something along the lines of when you get to a certain age, you want to give, you want to pass on what you've learned, because otherwise, when you die, everything that you've learned and all your expertise and all your wisdom, if you have any, is going to die with you. So it becomes almost a challenge of older age to be able to bequeath not money, but what you've gained in your life. And then at the same time, a younger person needs to have that mentorship so that they can, follow along in whatever their ambition is. And it struck me, and it still strikes me, that these relationships can be the most profound relationships in a person's life.
Hmm.
And if you have a fabulous parent-child relationship, it can it can just illuminate your whole life. Or if you have a fabulous mentor in your profession, it can, these relationships can be absolutely beautiful, but when they don't work, they can be really destructive. So as soon as I had that sense of those two kinds of characters, I knew that I had something that I could write about, for over and over without running out of material, because it's classic and it's eternal and it's important. And these two characters, I think what keeps them together, or what I'm very conscious of when I'm writing them, is the fact that they really need each other, um, and they both know it.
Yeah.
They can't really live without each other. And they also, and this is a little secret, they actually really like each other too. So so the tension is very, very productive.
Yeah.
It's a conflict, but it's a conflict in which they're both winning in a way.
Right.
So that struck me as something I could just work with and really enjoy.
Did you approach this book with the thought of series potential? Because the this type of story is ripe for a series. Like at the end of this, I was like, okay, now what's their next adventure? I'm primed and ready for the next one. Do you think, when you're writing a first book in a series like this, do you think series potential?
I wasn't thinking of it in the foreground of my mind, but I was aware that it was a possibility,
Yeah.
because most books like this do become series. Um, And I think, yeah, so I was aware of it, but I think the key to this kind of a story is that their relationship has to change with every book, you
Yeah.
know, and they're both going to be, they have their own personal arc, but then they have the arc of the relationship, and we'll see how that progresses. The second book in this series is in editing right now, so it should be out, I assume, in a year.
Nice.
And I
At
think,
what point in the process do you start having these conversations with your publisher about series potential? Like, was that a from the ground conversation, or like at what point does someone start bringing up the topic of series potential?
well, in this case, the publisher Berkeley is a new publisher for me. So
Hmm.
the book was written and then it was submitted to publishers. So when the editor at Berkeley got hold of it, he said, "Well, we'll offer you a two-book contract." And so it was just assumed at that point that there would be another book in the series. So,
Gotcha.
just it was part of the package, I guess,
Yeah.
that we would have
Um,
it.
your notebook process that you showed us earlier, yeah, that's a wonderful idea for exploring characters and all of that. Um, does that does that notebook come in handy when you're looking at book two in a series? Do you start a new notebook, or are there things from the first notebook that carry over? Like, how does that notebook process work in series writing?
Well, I think it works the same way. I mean, right now I'm writing characters, and I'm trying to come up with characters that feel alive to me. Uh,
Hmm.
for the second book that's now in the editing stage, I wrote lists of characters, I wrote character sketches, I wrote, um, I'm trying to find somebody, a character that feels so real to me that I don't have to write them. I don't have to invent them. Once they get there on the page and they're in my mind, then they have a life of their own. And so that's what I'm looking for. And that just takes all kinds of, scribbling. And then yeah, so it's the same process.
Gotcha, gotcha. Well, the new book is out everywhere now. The World's Greatest Detective and Her Just Okay Assistant. Available everywhere now. You can go grab it in hardback at your local bookstore. If you don't have a great local bookstore, we'll put links to it in the show notes to make it easy for you to order it online from Amazon. Um, I have not checked out the audiobook yet. Have you had a chance to listen to the audio of this book?
I listen to. I have heard from other people who've heard it, who said that they really do like the narrator, and I listened to about 2 minutes of it, and then I had to turn it off because for some reason I can't listen to people narrate my books, and you
It's a
know
little weird, isn't it?
it's
But
weird, it's weird, and also I start editing. I start saying, "Oh, well, I could have skipped that sentence. I should have taken that." There comes a point where you just have to stop, and say, "It is what it is." I hope people like it. Um, I don't wanna
well,
hear my sentences, and if I can't revise them, then I don't wanna hear them.
I understand. Uh, Liza, if people are just discovering you and want to dig into all the great stuff that you're up to, where can they find you online and follow along for upcoming news and all that good stuff?
The best place would be, Instagram at Liza Tully Writes, and I also have a website at lizatully.com,
Great.
and I look
Do you
forward to hearing from people.
do you have time for one more question that just came in from
Yeah.
David? Says, what does a typical writing day look like for you?
Oh, good question. The best writing day, my best writing day is I get up, I exercise, come home, I eat. All right, I have to tell you every little detail, but well, basically, the dog is walked, everything's fed, the emails that have to be answered, all of it gets done, and it's all put aside by noon. And then at noon from 4, that's my time to write. And I hope then I try to keep that time sacred. I have to do it that way, and I think this comes from having been a mom and a teacher and feeling like I had to steal my writing time.
Mm,
So I
yeah.
couldn't ever really settle into writing unless I felt like I'd already done the groceries, done the grading of the papers, done everything has to be
Ticked all the boxes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and then I have my time. Um, so I run around like mad doing all kinds of crazy little stuff so I can grab my hours of without guilt.
Without guilt. Yeah. That same holds true for so many people. I agree with you. Liza, this has been so much fun chatting. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Well, and thank you for inviting me, Hank, and I really love your show, so thanks for having me.
Thank you.